Hi, my name is Robert Pasnau. I'm a professor in the philosophy department at CU Boulder, and I am making this recording to congratulate Mark Boespflug, who is receiving his doctorate this spring. He's one of these students, Mark is, who basically could have done the whole thing by himself. He has, I think it's fair to say, at every step of the way, he hardly needed my help. He's known ever since he came here what he wanted to do, and he just is someone who's gone out and he's done it. He could have done the whole thing by correspondence course, which ironically enough is more or less what the situation ends up being these days. Mark's dissertation is on the ethics of belief. That's to say, he is talking about the question of the circumstances under which it's right to believe something, in which we ought to believe something, the circumstances under which we're wrong to believe the things we believe. One of the central questions in the ethics of belief, and the question Mark's particularly focused on, is the question of whether we're actually free to form beliefs when we want to. And this is controversial because there are good arguments on both sides. On the one hand, of course, we do say that people are more or less responsible for the beliefs they hold. We blame them for certain beliefs. We give them credit for believing certain sorts of things. In many religious traditions, people can be damned for all eternity for believing the wrong sorts of things. But on the other hand, there's also reasons for fearing that beliefs may not be under our control. After all, if things seem a certain way to you, then how do you change them so that they appear a different sort of way? There can feel a certain sort of inevitability about the things we believe. And so this has been a very long debate in the history of philosophy. Mark's interested in a particular portion of that history, the 17th century, and he's interested in the two of the most prominent figures from the 17th century, René Descartes and John Locke. They turn out to have interestingly different views. Descartes, as Mark argues, is somebody who thinks that we are free to form beliefs of whatever sort we want, at least within certain sorts of limits. And this turns out to be very important to Descartes' philosophy. Descartes, in fact, formulates an entire method of philosophizing that he thinks we're free to adopt or not to adopt, and that if we adopt it, we will lead ourselves to form certain sorts of beliefs. This will be to our credit if we do that, and if we don't do that, then we have only ourselves to blame. John Locke, in contrast, thinks that beliefs are not in our control in that sort of way. This is surprising because Locke is actually the person who formulated one of the most famous slogans in the ethics of belief. According to Locke, we should always proportion our beliefs to the evidence that's available to us, something that philosophers constantly quote in talking about these issues. Nevertheless, Locke, as Mark shows, does not think that beliefs are in our control. Yet what Locke does think is that we have control over an earlier stage of the process. We have control over the question of how hard we work to gather evidence, how diligent we are to gather the sorts of evidence that we need, and how closely we attend to the evidence that we've gathered. That, for Locke, is the thing we're responsible for. And this turns out to be, in our present context, a rather important question, of course, because one of the things people seem to be fighting over these days and seems to be generating a great deal of conflict is the very question of the sorts of evidence that people hold themselves accountable for having. So that's Mark's project. He's already begun a position at the University of Otago on the South Island of New Zealand, in the very south of the South Island. Sadly, he had to leave New Zealand because of the COVID crisis, but I'm very much hoping that he and his family will get to go back there live and in person before too long and continue his position there. So congratulations, Mark, and best wishes.